Hello and welcome to the New Schools Podcast. Let's play Guess the Guest. He was a public school principal. Now he's been in the field of alternative education for over 40 years. And he's behind the organization that is the #1 result on Google for alternative education. You know who I'm talking about. It's Jerry Mintz. And the website is educationrevolution.org, belonging to the Alternative Education Resource Organization, aka AERO. Besides being the founder and director of AERO, Jerry was the first executive director of the National Coalition of Alternative Community Schools, founded in 1978, and was a founding member of the International Democratic Education Conference in the early 90s. He was the editor-in-chief for the Handbook of Alternative Education and the Almanac of Education Choices, and he is the author of the more recent Schools Over: How to Have Freedom and Democracy in Education, and editor of Turning Points, a book in which 35 visionaries in education tell their own story. Today's conversation covers topics like the current demand for alternative education. Is it real, or is it an artificial bubble caused by COVID? We'll learn about what it means for a school to be democratic, and you'll get tips on choosing a new school or creating one yourself. And now, without further delay, we hope you enjoy this conversation with your host, Shannon Falkenstein and Jerry Mintz.
Hello, Jerry Mintz. Thanks so much for being on the New Schools Podcast.
Well, nice to be there, Shannon, and let's hope we can give some useful information to people.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure our audience will greatly appreciate that. So I'd love to start out on a positive note, always focused on the learners. Would you share with us what is your favorite thing about working with young learners?
Well, I mean, I like teaching. It keeps me young. Right now, it's all virtual, you know, for the most part. But you know, I learn a lot from students that I've taught over the years, and I think that one of the things I love to do a lot is teaching table tennis. And one of the reasons why I like to do that is because I know the sport very well, and I can help people become good very fast. And so they can get confidence in themselves as learners in a non-academically threatening way.
Oh, I love that. Wow, that's great. I love that. Tell us a little bit, Jerry, about what is your origin story? Like, how did you come to decide to be in the area of alternative education? Is it true that you were a traditional public school principal?
Well, I was on the planet Vulcan. I was a public school principal, but I knew what I was doing, and wrote a little book called I Was a Spy in the Public Schools. But
really, you wrote a book with that title?
It's an ebook on our website. You know,
I have to read that.
Educationrevolution.org. But if you want to talk about origins, I think the key experience for me was when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. And we used to visit my grandfather in Boston, Massachusetts, every week or two. And he was a brilliant guy. He was such an expert on Shakespeare. He wrote something called After the Curtain Falls, Extra Acts of Shakespearean Plays in iambic pentameter that was performed around Europe. And
wow.
What happened next, in other words, you know?
Yeah.
I really need to do something with that because it's quite an amazing thing. I have a copy of it here. So he would sit down he was a judge and a lawyer too. And so he would sit down with me and he'd say, so, what do you want to learn? And so, of course, that struck me as the proper way to learn, and he would give me choices if I wanted, it could be science, could be history, that sort of thing.
And being a lawyer, my stepfather is very, very dear to me, and I credit a lot with my education, is also a lawyer. And he always was very Socratic with me. Is that how your grandfather was?
No, I think that would be doing more than being learner-centered in a sense. He just literally wanted to know what I wanted to know, and then he would tell me stories or things, based on what I was interested in. And so that was the paradigm for me. Then I realized that school wasn't like that. And I wondered why. And then I was always trying to make changes, go outside the box. And finally, when I was 15 or so, I organized all of my friends in school who were in the elite. I was not. I never worked at that system very hard. But we got together 2 or 3 times a week in each other's houses and discussed whatever we wanted to discuss. And if we didn't know something, we could get our own guest speakers. And so I was running it, as a 15-year-old. So I realized in retrospect, that was the first school that I started, and probably the most important one I ever went to.
Wow,
so,
like the Jerry Mintz Salon.
Yeah. So anyway, later on, I went to alternative colleges. I wound up at Goddard College. And by then I knew that I wanted to start some kind of a school. And I actually, when I was hitchhiking, I came across somebody who had been to Summerhill. And so I just, he told me about it. He told me that there were people who had started a school based on Summerhill in upstate New York, one
Jerry,
of whom was...
Tell us, just because some people on the podcast may not know how seminal Summerhill it was or what it is. Would you just give us a little primer on Summerhill?
Well, Summerhill was started in 1921, so it's about to celebrate its 100th birthday next year.
Wow.
And it was one of the first schools that ran democratically and was non-coercive, and students did not have to go to any classes if they didn't want to. There was a schedule. They could go or not. There was no pressure on them to go. And they could work independently. And, that school has been going ever since. It was started by A.S. Neal. And it turns out that his daughter helped start this one upstate New York that when I was going to college, I interned there. And the interesting thing is, how could that be? Well, he had his daughter when he was 63, A.S. Neal, the one who started Summerhill.
Wow.
And she's running school still, 100 years later. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
And her children will probably be taking over. And so I've been there many times visiting. I try to stop by on my way to giving talks, places. I did a TEDx in Norway once, and I stopped on the way and that sort of thing. So as I said, I found out about Summerhill. I found out about this thing upstate New York, and I interned there, and that helped orient me toward what education should be. So that's what I've been kind of working on since then, which I would summarize as a learner-centered approach. And so now we have an organization that I've been running for 31 years, called AERO, Alternative Education Resource Organization. And basically we network all of the educational alternatives around the world. Like if you Google alternative education, you get us first. And so we also help people start new alternatives. So we have an online course we're in the middle of right now. People can still get access to it. You'll see how to do that from the website, but not fully participate in the interactive aspect, but you can see what is posted. You can audit it, basically. But it helps people who want to start new alternatives.
Can you, many of our in our audience are parents or educators who feel frustrated with the current conventional system and are looking for alternatives. So I think this sounds like a fantastic resource for them. Would you tell us the URL where they can find you?
I mean, they should just go to our website, educationrevolution.org.
Educationrevolution.org. Okay.
And you can go over to find a school and then see the whole program under Start Your Own Alternatives, or go over to resources and look at the School Starter Consultation Program. And so that is what you could actually jump into now. So it's like a quarter of the price. And so some people have just done that. There's a school in New York City called Pono, which is a great little school. And that's in the east, that's in West Harlem, actually. And so the woman who started that took that consultation program from us. So there's over 100 of them. There's a map of the ones we've started. And if you go to AERO member schools, you'll see 600. So you're likely to find something in your area, but otherwise we can help you start something. So the whole idea is to make a learner-centered approach available to students everywhere. And what I mean by learner-centered is students who, programs that listen to what the students are interested in and build on their interest, rather than curriculum-driven, which is an old model, which is just very, very antiquated. It had its purpose at some point, maybe. But this will help you become a lifelong learner. The other, this is like, there are basically two learning paradigms. Mm-hmm. And it's not really anything between. It's usually one or the other. Either you believe the kids are natural learners, and then you take the approach that we take, or you're in the traditional 95, 97%, and you believe the kids are naturally lazy and need to be forced to learn, and that you have all the answers, and that they just need to sit down and listen to you and feedback to you what you say and take the test and pass the test and so on. That is a system that is not preparing people to live in this millennium. But if you believe that kids are natural learners, then there are certain things that they do in the traditional system that make no sense. And one is kids working or learning things for grades. Why would you do that? That's somebody else's idea of what you should just want to work because you want to learn something. And the second thing is homework. It's a dumb concept, because if there's something you wanted to learn on your own, you would simply no one could stop you from learning it. Kids don't get forced to learn how to use computers, do they? Or cell phones or whatever, no. And so if you have to assign somebody homework, it means that it's not something they would have naturally done necessarily. And what does that mean? Well, if kids are natural learners, forcing them to learn things they're not interested in extinguishes, over a period of time, that natural ability to learn.
Yeah, it sure does. So, Jerry, when I started my Acton alternative school, it was definitely an alternative here in El Salvador. But many people and Actons all over have this experience that parents see an Acton or an alternative school and they think that's for kids who aren't making it at regular school. So, right? So there's that mental paradigm, and we're constantly trying to say, no, that's not what it's about. It's not that they can't make it at the other school. It's that we find this to be a much better way of doing things for several reasons. One is because it respects the child more, the learner more. Two, we believe it is preparing them more for the future. What is your take on that kind of?
Well, you're not going to be too successful in dissuading some people of that. The reason is that that's the system they grew up in. And so that's what they know. And even those of us like me, who understands and teaches and demonstrates this kind of thing all over the world, I am always fighting against my training, which taught me that you can't learn things unless someone teaches you. But if you look at your own kids, 3, 4, 5 years old, no one forced them to learn how to talk or walk, you know?
Right.
They were natural learners. And then all of a sudden they get to be school age and they say, well, you taught yourself those things, but from now on, you just have to listen to what you're told. You can't learn in that way anymore. Just think how stupid that is, you see. So if kids are able to continue in that process, they become unbelievable by the time they're teenagers. Whereas if they're in the other system, their eyes just turn dead.
Yes.
You know, and not only that, so some people might bring up, particularly homeschool, people who are critical of homeschooling. Some people might bring up the idea of, well, what about socialization? Well, think about what that means. Socializing to what? If you take children, students, in a regular classroom, what does that mean? They are in a very, very unnatural situation in which they're never going to be for the rest of their lives. They are never going to be working together with people all their exact same age. Never, ever going to happen.
And they're never going to be sitting in rows.
Right.
And they're never going to be taking tests, right?
So exactly. You know, it's interesting. This movement is all over the world.
The alternative movement, the homeschooling movement.
Everyone, everywhere, somewhere, there's somebody who realizes, no, we got to start something different, just like you did there. And so, of all places, in Russia, I once knew a guy who started a public school, inner city public school. He took over one, actually changed it to a democratic school called the School of Self-Determination.
Wow, what a great name.
This was before the coup.
Wow.
And I met him there when I first went to the first New Schools Festival of the Soviet Union in 1991.
Wow.
And there were about 400 people there and lots of alternatives. Now, it was also the last New Schools Festival of the Soviet Union, because when I came back to Moscow and took the train back to England, where I was going to fly back to New York, while I was on the train, they had the coup.
Oh.
And where I was standing the day before at Yeltsin's White House is where he confronted the tank.
Wow.
So meanwhile, so I met this guy, Alexander Trubelsky, who had started the school in Moscow. And then eventually I met another guy by the name of Miroslav Balaban, who came up with a concept called park schooling. And to oversimplify his concept, park schooling is, well, if you go into a park, you go when you want, you do what you want, you leave when you want, and nobody has a right to test you on the way out. That was his concept for park schools. And so his daughter is continuing his legacy. And so she actually had a park school within Alexander Trubelsky's school. See, that was a public school with about 600-700 kids. Her program had about 50 kids, and they could use anything they wanted in the building.
Wow.
So now, still setting up park schools around Russia, and there's one just outside of Moscow that we're in communication with. If you look at member schools, you'll see it there. So now, the name of our website, as I said before, is educationrevolution.org. Well, that's because our goal was always the education revolution, making learner-centered education available to children everywhere, having people understand that they had choices. Guess what just happened? the education revolution just happened.
COVID. Right.
That's right.
Is that what you mean?
And I didn't realize it first, because I had regular homeschoolers saying to me, yeah, that's not homeschooling. But you know what? It was, and it is, because they're real parents with real kids trying to make the best as they can out of the situation to do what's best of the kids. And what's happened is we went from 3.5% of people homeschooling to 96% overnight.
Right.
Now, as schools have opened up again, people have started going back, and the people in the system thought they still had a captive audience. They don't.
So I listened to you talk to Blake Bowles, that you and Blake Bowles interviewed one another on your podcast, right? It was great. And I learned so much. And I also talked to Blake a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him, hey, with COVID, like, you must really be in demand. And he said, no, because everyone is so in a survival mode right now, just, parents working and trying to help their kids and everything. It's so much uncertainty and so much new pressure that people aren't actually looking for alternatives right now. But our prediction was kind of that when, exactly what you're saying, when COVID dies down, post-vaccine, and they start going back, everyone has been doing it totally differently now, and they're not going to be tolerating this system anymore. Is that your prediction too?
I just heard an amazing statistic. New York City. Now remember, in New York, we had a less than 1% rate for a long time. And so they reopened the schools.
A homeschooling rate.
They reopened the public schools so people could go back in person.
Right. But you had, less than a 1% homeschooling rate?
Less than a 1% infection rate.
Oh, infection rate. Okay. Sorry.
So what happens, they reopened the schools. Guess what? Only 25% sent their kids back.
Wow.
I just heard that statistic. I said, wow. The others are continuing to homeschool. I mean, sure, they're worried about the virus still, but there's obviously other things. And so everything has changed. Everything is in the process of changing. We don't know where it's going to go, but we know it's all going to be different. Colleges too.
Yes, I agree.
To me, one of the best colleges, as an example of what probably all colleges will have to do, is the pioneering Goddard College. Goddard, which I went to, full disclosure, when it was full time, set up something called low residency. And what that meant and means is you go to the college for a week to 10 days. You meet the other people, other classmates, teachers, design independent studies, and go home and do them. And then the next group comes. And then the next group comes.
And they did this as a response to COVID, or they did it prior to COVID?
They pioneered this. They pioneered this when they realized that the cost of these small colleges was becoming prohibitive.
Right.
So I would say they actually pioneered what they called the adult degree program, probably 40 years ago or more, a long time ago.
Wow.
Then that evolved into the low residency, but they've been doing the low residency for probably at least 10 years.
And where is Goddard College located?
It's in Vermont.
In Vermont.
And at the moment, I don't know if they're having any in-person ones. I think that they're actually even having the residency online. But Goddard College is a great way to do what you're doing, get credit for it, full credit, and help with what you want to do. And so, and Goddard, produced some amazing people like David Mamet, the playwright.
Oh, right.
From Fish, the singing group, lots of people that went to Goddard and wound up doing pretty creative things. Now, I want to get back to one other thing because I didn't want to miss this. So your preschool is Montessori.
Yes.
I want you to know that there is nothing antithetical to democratic process in Montessori.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
And so Montessori, her most important catchword was follow the child.
Yes, it was.
Well, guess what that means? Follow the child.
Yes. Even when they're 13 and 15 and 16. Yes.
Centered approach. Okay, so thinking about that, I've demonstrated democratic process all over the world. I had just been to India to try to help them do democratic process in a school of 2,600 people. And what I did is I took subgroups over a week's time and showed them all how to do democratic process. And then the idea was that they would go back to their home rooms, and if there was an issue, have a meeting in their homeroom, come up with a vote, take the vote totals to a parliament rather than just be representatives. So anyway, that's the way we did that in India. And so I came back to New York, and one of the schools that we helped to start in New Jersey wanted me to come over there and demonstrate democratic process. So, okay, so I started to drive over, and then as I'm driving over, I'm thinking, well, wait a second. The oldest kid in that school is 5 years old. And wow, I don't know if they're going to be able to do this. I'm going to have to at least, give them the agenda and, so on. So I get there. One of the kids is yelling, "Mommy," 2.5-year-old. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, no, I can't see how this is going to work. Then comes the time for the demonstration. And it's a very rare instance in which somebody other than myself is holding a camera to videotape what happened there. And we get around this circle on the table, and the kids are all there. Some of the kids are lying on the table. and I start to explain to them. I said, okay, so I'm going to tell you about how this democratic process works. There's two main things you have to know. You're going to talk about or come up ideas for either something you think is a good idea for the school or something that's a problem in the school. All the hands went up. All the hands went up. And one kid talked about the fact that he'd noticed that some kids would go outside when they were sick. And even if it was cold, he didn't know if this was a good idea. We discussed it. Proposal was made. They voted that if you have a cold, you can't go out in the cold.
Aw, how empathetic.
And another girl said that she liked candy and she liked chocolate, but she'd heard that there was a substance in chocolate that if you, ate it too late in the day, it could keep you up at night. And so we had a discussion about that, and it was passed that you can't eat chocolate after noon. So in answer to my question, no, I did not have to come up with an agenda. And you see, what dragged me back there is my own education. Oh my God, I have to show them what to do. No, absolutely not. And so and you can see that whole demonstration on our website. So if you go to member services, you go under members, you can see member services, you can see videos. And there's one that's called Preschool Democracy. And you might need a code to get in, and the code that you would need, I think all lowercase, member 2016.
Member 2016, all lowercase. Okay.
That's on educationrevolution.org.
Okay.
you could go there and see that demonstration. And people in my school starters class have watched that and have been blown away because obviously we didn't think that would work. And I'll give you another example of something that was one of my favorite experiences as I've traveled around the world. Every year we have something called the IDEC, the International Democratic Education Conference. And this year it was organized by people at an orphanage in Nepal. And every year it's organized by, and it's one of the most amazing places that you've ever seen. They grow all their own food. They take care of 300 kids. They sell their excess food. They have a dairy on their 2.5-acre spot in near Kathmandu, and they sell their excess milk in Kathmandu. They have another location in the southern part of the country where they grow grains. They have a program for truckers. They're hurting now because, of course, they were making money off of tourists, and that's pretty much dried up, you know. So anyway, so they hosted this year's IDEC, and it was virtual, and they had 1,200 people involved with it. It was absolutely amazing. So I went to the IDEC in Israel several years ago, and 2 weeks later, this woman who I told you about, Balaban's daughter, Olga, asked me if I would go to a conference in St. Petersburg where they were wanting to start a park school. Well, I don't like flying all over the place, let me tell you. And if anybody else, I would have said, forget, I can't do it. But I did it because she's a friend of mine. So I flew there, and one of the things they said was, we don't want a talking head. We want this to be done in a non-traditional way. Well, I might have been the only one who understood what they meant. But I understood what they meant. Yeah. So one of the things I did when I went there is I went around with a translator. This was mostly for families, about 1,000 people. And I went around with the translator and I asked these kids, I have to do a presentation 2 o'clock this afternoon. Would you come help me? All you have to do is think about questions that you always want to know the answer to. That's it. So I got 10 kids lined up that said they would come. Now, just think what kind of a leap of faith this was. Did I think maybe nobody would come? Maybe if they came, nobody would say anything. It was in another language. So it comes 2 o'clock. I've set the chairs up on the stage. And the kids begin filing up there, and the audience starts coming in. And so I go with my notebook, and I go around to each kid, and I ask them, so what did you always want to know the answer? They had all kinds of things. One of the kids from the audience, who I hadn't invited, came up and he sat on a chair. He wanted to be part of it. Another kid asked me a question from the audience. His question was, I want to know what you want to know. What did you want to know? So I put that down. Then when we were done with all the questions, we asked all the kids, I went down the list of each of the ones, and I said to see which ones were most popular. They could vote for as many as they wanted. Well, one that was screen time. So we had a whole discussion about screen time. Should it be limited? Was it a problem? And all that kind of stuff. And then eventually, after we did a couple of questions, time was running out. I only had 20 minutes to do this. I said, okay, well, here's one of the more popular ones. What did you want to know? And I said, well, what I wanted to know was, would this work? You know, would this work? Would anybody show up? Would they understand? And so then I asked the audience, so how many people here in the audience believe that kids are natural learners as a result of this demonstration? And, you know, people raised their hands and so on, and there weren't very many who didn't. And afterwards, I talked to Olga, and she said, Jerry, you missed the best part of your demonstration. You missed it. I said, well, what do you mean I missed it? when you asked that question, all the kids who had translations said, "We're waving their hands. Yes, we believe."
Oh, what a great story.
So that's why I like doing this work.
Yeah, that's great. Wow, wow, wow. So tell us, you mentioned the IDEC conference in Nepal this last time, and then the AERO conference. Are those two different conferences?
The IDEC's always in another country, except for once or twice it's been hosted in the United States. We hosted in 2003. The AERO conference is every year, and we actually usually discourage people from other countries to be part of it, but this year it was for the first time virtual. So we had 500 people come to the AERO conference.
And when is that for our listeners? When could they participate? What's the mission? How can we get involved in that?
Well, the next one, we usually have one in the middle of the year, and the next one is going to be in the middle of the year. It's going to be in February.
Oh, okay, soon.
And it's called the AERO-X. So I mentioned Kath Frey's with Workspace before earlier. She did an in-person AERO-X at her place, but the last couple that we've done have been virtual. And that was before all this. So we have had some experience with it. We're going to have it virtually. It's not going to be a one-day event, but a two-day event because of the popularity of the one we did last June. That was 4 days. Our conference is 4 days. By the way, the IDEC this year in Nepal was 2 weeks.
Wow.
And people were not happy when it was over. And the reason why they did that is to try to create real community, and they were successful. So anyway, they could get involved in the AERO-X. Again, go to the AERO website. In fact, go to this. We're just now putting together the website for the AERO-X. You can go to aeroconference.org,
Okay.
aeroconference.org, and you'll see the website in process with the keynotes so far and that sort of thing. It's pretty cheap. It's like $75 for 2 very packed days, you know. So that's so that's coming up, and then we have no idea what the AERO conference in June is going to be. Will it be virtual again? My guess would be probably. I don't think we'll be out of the woods yet. By the way, for people who are starting new alternatives, this is the time. Why? Because everyone's looking for something different. And if you start something online, you don't have any overhead. You don't have to rent a building.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's talk about that. Parents or educators who want to are frustrated, are like, what? Let's do something different now, but they feel afraid. What are your 3 top tips that you would tell parents? I'm sure you've encountered a lot of parents like that in your time, yes?
There's only one thing they need to know, and it's very important, and I'm glad that you brought this up. If you are taking responsibility for your child's education through homeschooling, and especially if you haven't done this before and you think, oh my God, I've got to create everything they do in schools. No, you do not and should not try to do that. No reason to try to recreate a failed system. There's only one thing you need to know. Children are natural learners. If you know that, they're the ones who are bringing the curriculum to you. All you have to do is be a good listener. And as they express interest in things, or even they don't have to say, I'm interested in this. You see what they do. You're their parent. You can tell what they like to do. Is it in arts and crafts? Is it in building things? Is it whatever? Help them do that. Build on that. All the stuff you do that way will last forever. All the stuff you do trying to recreate the curriculum from school will last 2 days. So
Great
that's
advice.
that's all they really need to know. And then
follow
just
the child, right?
Yeah.
Follow the child. Oh, fantastic. Okay. And what other services do you offer at AERO?
Well, we do individual consultations.
Okay. So a parent who's like, I got to do something different could come to you and you would help them.
Yeah, I remember doing a consultation this year, and this guy in no way wanted to be homeschooling, but there he was, you know, having to do it. And he said, but he noticed something interesting happened along the way. One day his daughter got up and said, I want to start working with the horses next door. And he said, oh, well, okay. And so he talked to his neighbor next door and arranged it. Now she's up at the crack of dawn going over with the horses and so on. And it's a whole curriculum around horses. And so this is what lots of parents are discovering. Even if the school is trying their damnedest to make school at home, to stand up in front of the classroom like they do in the public school and drone along, they can't do it for very long. All these schools are short. Sometimes I talked to one kid who basically the teacher got on and said, okay, yeah, I do the full time some days, but today and tomorrow, I can't teach 2 classes at once. I'm just going to give you the assignments and you can do this stuff on your own. Gives them homework and it's about 15 minutes. And that's it. They're done.
Yeah.
And so they go through their homework and that's it. So I find that kids, even who are involved with a traditional school, have so much more time on their hands to be creative. And parents are noticing this. That's just one of the reasons why things are never going to be the same.
Yeah. So, Jerry, another question I love to ask always is to help people wrap their heads around this is to offer a metaphor. If you could offer a metaphor that is comparing kind of conventional school to alternative school, what would you offer as a metaphor?
I think I've already done that pretty much. Yeah, I mean, basically, traditional school, they just don't believe the kids are natural learners, and alternative schools and homeschoolers, they do. And the interesting thing is there are some homeschoolers who try to sort of recreate school at home. And I remember talking to John Holt a long time ago about that, especially religious homeschoolers. And I said, what about that? And he said, well, either their kids will teach them how to teach them, or they'll give up and send them back to school.
Yeah, I've noticed that I did homeschooling briefly, and found right away the same thing, that it was like I was trying to impose what we had to learn. My kids were like, no, Mom. And I was like, okay. So I would just wake up in the morning and be like, what do you want to do today? And then we would just do that, you know? But I was worried, that they weren't going to get what they needed. And I ended up starting a school so that we would have more interaction and things like that. I felt kind of isolated. But I also found that sometimes homeschoolers are doing traditional school in their home, and they actually have perhaps a higher degree of control over their children than even school does. And that was an interesting
well, let me say this. There's nothing wrong with a very structured program if the kids want it and if they request it. Nothing wrong. In fact, people sometimes make the mistake of not doing that when what they want is detailed instruction on how to do things, you know. So that's okay. If it's forced on them, it's absolutely counterproductive. But I want to tell you that the extent to which you have the approach of listening to what the kids are interested in and having them become what now is the biggest trend in homeschooling, which is unschooling, which is basically the same thing we've been talking about. I had a kid once who was interning with us, and he was an unschooler. And he taught himself how to play guitar. and, you know, other stuff like that and so on. He actually was a professional traveling around Europe for a while with having been self-taught, you know, and, you know, just other things he taught himself how to do. But he decided he wanted to go to college. And so he went back to North Carolina where he could do it free as a homeschooler. But in order to get in, you had to pass this test, which included algebra, which he had never been interested in learning. So what did he do?
He learned algebra.
He studied algebra on his own for 1 week.
Right. That's how long it takes when you're motivated.
Aced the test and even was able to teach other people. When you have not stopped kids' ability to learn, they learn at lightning speed, unbelievable speed. And so that's the thing to remember. But to the extent to which you think you know what the answers are, and they must know this because they hadn't heard of this, you're probably wrong.
Wow. Wow. Well, you are an inspiration. And I like so many people like you who I talk to, I feel like give so much confidence and relief to people who don't feel like it's working for them, but are worried that the options are terrifying. So I really appreciate you. I think the audience really appreciates all the amazing things you've said and also how much experience you have in this area to give them confidence.
One thing I didn't mention is we do have a whole library of books for sale, including about 15 books that we have published ourselves. And you can't get all of those things on Amazon, but you know, people don't, and some of them are ebooks.
Oh, great. That's great.
So you can get them that way. And again, it's under the AERO bookstore at educationrevolution.org. So that's, and you know, some for basic things. I wrote a book called School's Over.
I love it.
Then there's a bunch of others on there that are useful. There's one that we use, for example, How to Grow a School in our online course. And so there's a lot of democratic education written by Yaakov Hecht in Israel. Didn't even talk about Israel. Israel has over 25 public democratic schools.
Wow. That's like Wisconsin. Do you know that Wisconsin has public Montessori? They have like the most per capita public Montessori schools in the country. It's incredible.
They're all over the country, public Montessori, sure.
But I never knew that Milwaukee has a ton of them. It's amazing.
When they first started doing that, there was some question of, oh, is this religious oriented? But they even have public Waldorfs too.
Oh, wow. So what does it take? What kind of a school, what are the requirements for a school to be listed on AERO as an alternative school?
Well, you have to become a member school organization. That's on the website. By the way, we have a free newsletter that comes out every single week. And with all the latest news in alternative education, homeschooling, everything. And you can sign up for that on any page of the website, educationrevolution.org.
And would you consider Acton to be to fit the criteria to be an alternative school in your model?
If you consider your Acton to be learner-centered, that's the commonality.
100%. Yeah.
Something I know a lot about, but just as long as you consider it a learner-centered approach, you could become a member. As a member, you get a link with a website from our member site and a spot on the map.
Fantastic. I will go there. Thank you. Okay, Derry. Well,
I don't think we have anything in El Salvador, actually. So
all right. Well, I want to be the first one. Not much going on here, so.
I was in El Salvador on my way over to Guatemala. Well, I worked with some schools there, and there are some things in Guatemala.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow. How long ago was that?
About 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh, okay. Wow, not long ago at all. Do you ever do the AERO conference or the IDEC conference in Latin America?
They actually were thinking about, that's one reason why they brought me down to Guatemala, but then they decided it was not safe yet for that.
Oh.
But we have had one in Puerto Rico, and we have had one in Brazil.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well, I'll have to keep my ear to the ground on that one. Okay, Jerry. Well, I have super enjoyed talking with you, and I believe that our audience has learned so much from you. All the links to learn more about your work will be in the show notes, but let's just tell them the quickest way, again, that our listeners can find you.
Well, they can go to educationrevolution.org,
Okay.
and they can write to me from the website.
Perfect. Okay, that will be really helpful. So, well, I want to thank you so much, Jerry Mintz, for coming, and to all of our listeners for stopping by today.
Okay, I'd love to hear from everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the New Schools podcast. Tell a friend. Previous episodes and show notes, including any books or websites our guests recommend, can be found at thenewschools.com. If you're a parent who is looking for a new school for your family, send us a message. We would love to help. We can answer questions, share the resources we have, and help you get in touch with people in your area who are on the same path, determined to provide their kids with the best education. It's wildly important work. Thank you for doing it, and we'll see you next time.